From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt. Our colleague Noel is on an adventure, but we'll be back very soon.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. This is, I was thinking about this earlier, Matt. This is an episode about more than one conspiracy. In fact, I would argue we could call this a story of conflicting dual conspiracies, both true, both set against one another in a fundamental shadow war. And we were going to record this episode earlier. I'm glad we took some time on it because key to this tale is a larger than life, immensely controversial figure. To some folks, he's a hero. To others, and we'll get to those others in specific, he is a bungler who nearly risked the safety of America entire. Now, question, had you heard of this guy before we started researching him?
Only from, film school and this movie that came out in 1939 that we're going to talk about. That's the only reason I knew anything about this story. It is a weird time in U.S. history. Often, I think, at least in my personal experience, when we think about the United States and spying, there's a hyper focus on the United States versus the Soviet Union. This is a time before the Cold War spying days and games. It's interesting to take your mind to the 1920s and thinking about spying.
Yeah, it's also the interwar period is something that doesn't get a ton of examination in a lot of American public schools. And as we'll see, there's a reason you could argue some of this history is hidden. Tonight's episode is the story of a guy we're going to call Leon G. Turrou. We'll call him a Nazi hunter because he was. But maybe before we begin, we make a little note about pronunciation because it's sort of all over the place with his last name.
Yeah, if you watch the trailer for the movie we're going to be talking about in a moment, well, I guess, should we just say what the movie is? It's titled Confessions of a Nazi Spy. It was released in May 1939. And in that movie, they say this person's name. And they say Leon George Turrou. Turrou. But then if you look online at other people who are talking about this person, you're often going to hear, at least I heard Turrou. I think it was maybe a Scottish gentleman who said it that way.
And then we can't discount the presence of the transatlantic accent. A lot of historians that I've been reading or hearing have said Turrou. The spelling is Turrou. We are going to possibly slide in and out of different pronunciations, but be assured, fellow conspiracy realists, we're talking about the same guy. To some, a hero, again, to others, a real, Paul beat me here, and I hate to curse so early in the show, but a real up.
A super intense liar about all things.
Right. So let's dive into Leon, and to tell the story of Leon, we have to learn the story of the Nazis. Here are the facts. All right. Luckily, today in the modern U.S., for most people, for the vast majority of people in the West as well, calling someone a Nazi is a serious insult. It's such a it's so universally identified as a bad thing that it's a cliche. The internet has rules about it too, right? There's that tendency. There's this argument that at some point in political discourse, someone will call someone else inevitably a Nazi.
Yeah, it's the worst thing you can call somebody because they are history's enemies, right? The enemy number one of history is the Nazis. And but it really does go way, way, way back before the Nazi Party is ever established. You can trace it all the way back to 1841 to a guy named Friedrich List. This is a dude who just talked about expansionism, basically, and economic control. Like the Germany basically should have a lot more of both of those things.
Blood and soil.
And go through criminal biology with Franz von Liszt. And I mean, you can go way back with basically the ideologies that formed into this thing called the German Workers' Party, or DAP.
Yeah, the German Workers' Party can be considered the demo mixtape of what we call the Nazi Party today. And the Nazi Party today is most closely associated with Germany in World War II for obvious and horrific reasons. But as you said, Matt, the roots of the party are much, much older. You could look at the Nazi Party as understood today as more of a distillation of some ideology that was already well established in that part of the world for some time, at length. What we call the Nazi Party, or the demo tape of it, was, as you said, the German Workers' Party, co-founded by a locksmith who's a guy named Anton Drexler. Co-founded this with 3 or 4 other guys on January 5th, 1919. So this is just after the armistice that ended the First World War. Germany is in a very bad way as a result of the agreements that ended the war. And Drexler is what we would call a far-right figure at this point. He's kind of, and no offense to us, in his early days, he's kind of podcaster level. And so he's holding these local meetings, these salons, you would call them in Europe, and he has people over to talk about ideas. They're all people who are kind of echoey chamber. He's not inviting dissenting views. Into this mix enters a guy named Adolf Hitler. It's on September 12th, 1919, and Adolf Hitler is there ostensibly as just an interested civilian to learn more from a self-taught economist named Gottfried Feder. And Gottfried Feder's kind of a pill. The subject of his lecture is breaking the slavery of financial interest, which is kind of a dog whistle for a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment. However, Hitler is already participating in a conspiracy at this point. He is there not really as a civilian. That's his cover. Instead, he has been assigned by the German army to monitor potential political agitators, which I think is funny as we see how things go on. Anyway, Hitler does something you probably shouldn't do in his position with the army at that time. He sticks out.
Well, yeah, he gives a big old public speech in October of 1919, or a prearranged public speaking engagement, let's say, immediately as a member of the DAP, just like right after going to the first one.
Right. Yeah. And in that first meeting, the October speech you're mentioning comes from this September 12th meeting, because in there he starts arguing loudly with a professor in the crowd who is raising objections to some of the economic concepts of Feder. And Hitler super impresses the DAP audience because he's passionate, he's vehement, he's got this electric energy, and he impresses everybody so much that the guy we mentioned earlier, Anton Drexler, comes to Hitler and says, "Hey, I dig your vibe. I wrote this pamphlet. It's called My Political Awakening. I think you should join up with us. You know, thanks for coming to the meeting. You should come to more, and you should talk about the things that you mentioned in this meeting." Hitler at this point feels he has found kindred spirits, and the rest, as they say, is history. In this case, terrible, terrible history.
Just for a little more historical context here, we have to mention what happened to the Weimar Republic's economy. And
right, post-World War I, yeah.
Yeah, post-World War I, post-revolution, post everything going on in Germany. In 1922, inflation hits really hard. And then as it goes in towards 1923, they hit hyperinflation. And just to really understand that.
Are you talking the wheelbarrow story, maybe?
Well, it's not even the story. Just to give the numbers, imagine that your US dollar compared to, what's another currency? A pound, British pound. Imagine that $600 equals 1 pound. And then imagine within months that becomes 2,000 US dollars equal 1 pound, then 10,000, then 40,000, then 150,000, then 3.5 million, then 10 million, then 60 million US dollars equals 1 pound. Imagine that internal existential political crisis that would cause, right? Within a country, within an individual, within systems, within groups and parties. That is the kind of crisis that creates real intense change because something's got to change, right?
Right.
And you combine that with in 1931, so like that's in 1922, 23. Combine that in 1931, you've got 5.6 million unemployed people that should be working in Germany. And you put those things together and you can just really see where if there's a strong enough orator that has some ideology backing the words that they're saying, you can create a movement pretty easily because you just need some way out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it okay if I tell the wheelbarrow story?
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite examples. So this is this is a bit embellished, but one of the best ways to understand this from a human level is that people at this time, hyperinflation is a thing that still happens in the modern age. Look at Zimbabwe, look at Venezuela. Hyperinflation, when it hits Germany, due to, again, the conclusion and the agreements of World War I, people would end up having to take wheelbarrows of their local currency to a place. And when they went to a store, they would try to purchase things as early as possible because by the conclusion of that business day, the money would literally be worth less. So, you hear horror stories about the Great Depression in the United States and runs on banks. There were runs on bakeries. There were runs on cobblers. There were runs on anyone doing business. People were trying to move the currency. It was a very desperate time, and desperation has ever been fertile soil for fascism. So this, and I appreciate you mentioning this is context in which these horrific things can occur. There is also I wouldn't say revisionist history, but there's a valid alternative history observation here, which is quite common in academia, that says if it weren't specifically an Adolf, it would have been someone else, because the public was so ready for someone to say there is a better way. Also, in a shameless plug, please check out Let's Start a Coup. The Smedley Butler story is very similar to that because the U.S. comes a lot closer to fascism than any of us or any textbook editors would like you to think.
Yeah. And if we're to believe all of the information from Leon G. Turrou, then that fascism was moving throughout the United States, even in this time in the 1920s.
And we've explored Nazi conspiracies at length in Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. Thankfully, most folks today are aware of the atrocities wrought by Nazi and Axis powers, and to be fair, also aware of other horrors committed by allies, right? Like the invasion of Russian forces and, of course, the deployment of nuclear weaponry on the U.S. part. However, there is a lot of hidden history out there still. Conspiracies that aren't as well known even as we record tonight in 2024. Enter Leon George Turrou. Original name, Leon George Turrowski, born September 14th, 1895 in Kobrin, Poland, which was then part of the Russian Empire, but his parents weren't Russian, right? They were French and Polish.
Oh, sure. Yeah. His father died before he was even born, and his mother then passed away early in his life. So he was, well, at least, again, it's tough. So is this his official biography? because the guy told so many stories about his origins. There are all these tales that he would tell, and the first one that you would hear from him often was, "I'm an orphan," right? But I don't know. It's tough with this guy because I've read other stories where maybe he wasn't actually an orphan and he did have family early on that were not dead. But according to, let's say, the official story, his dad died
like the
before.
story from the FBI.
Yeah, his dad, even from the FBI, but he was telling everybody stories, even the FBI. I don't know. It's a little weird. But according to the official story, his dad died 6 months before his birth, and his mother passed away early in his life.
Yeah, and with those caveats, which are nice foreshadowing, we'll say that, again, the official accepted biography after this guy's death is that, because spoiler, he's dead, is that he was adopted by a wealthy tradesman or merchant, basically a traveling guy who's doing well for himself. And as a result, young Leon spent most of his own childhood moving through different countries. And when he reaches the age of 18, he relocates to the United States and he gets a job as a translator for the New York Times because he has a command of multiple languages. Again, with a lot of caveats, Turrou serves in the French army from 1916 to 1920. He fights on the Eastern Front. He is engaged with German forces at some point, and he does take an injury. We don't know the extent of the injury. And we do know that
it's weird, though, because their story, I don't want to poke holes in any of this, Ben. It's just weird to know that he also told stories that he fought in a different area during the war, and that injury that we're talking about that's a bit mysterious was like, it was refuted by several other people, like, oh, that's not actually what the injury was from. And then he told other people a story about getting injured in a different way.
So the one thing we do know for sure is that he was hired by the FBI after an interview with J. Edgar Hoover. And according, again, to most of the official sources, he got the cosign to be hired despite lacking the normal qualifications that would typically be required of most prospective FBI agents. You know what I mean? Like college, in addition to military service or things like that, right? They have a checklist of stuff, their version of a background check, right? And he works for the Bureau for about 10 years. Matt, do you want to talk about the various claims of things he was involved in over that rough decade?
Well, I'm not really sure about that stuff. I just want to point out that I think this guy walking into J. Edgar Hoover's office and having a conversation, I do think in there somewhere is the telling of Turrou to Hoover, hey, I am a shadow. Nobody knows the actual facts about my life. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows anything about me. I can do things basically for you and for the Bureau that other people can't, because I'm literally a shadow.
And tabula rasa, a blank slate. Yeah. And that's that. I mean, we have to remember this is before the CIA. So maybe that's why I went to the FBI instead. We know that he received an assignment. And you can read about involvement with Pretty Boy Floyd or Lindbergh baby kidnapping, investigation of the Kansas City Union Station murders, and investigations into crashes and things like that. That's what occurred in this sort of montage period of that decade. But tonight's episode is not about that. Tonight's episode is about the assignment that would change his life and perhaps alter the course, or actually provably, in my opinion at least, alter the course of U.S. history far before World War II. In the interwar period, the American forces, the American public and government alike, were contemplating a blanket neutrality policy, what we would call isolationism. And during that time, the Nazi Party was conspiring to infiltrate U.S. soil to capture the hearts, minds, and ultimately, hopefully, the military of the American public. And so Agent Turrou was given an enormous, dangerous task. Everyone feared a new war was on the way. It was all over the press, but his bosses in the FBI told him a terrible secret. Leon, they said, the Nazis are already here. Here's where it gets crazy. Matt, I really appreciate what you pointed out about some of the missing context here, because a lot of modern Americans, and again, textbooks don't like to admit this, but eugenics and Nazi-like ideology and actual Nazi sympathizers existed in the U.S. since the 1920s. And when Hitler rose to power officially in 1933, those groups just got larger, right? They just sort of gained momentum, domino or snowball effect style.
Yeah, back in 1856, when an essay on the inequity of the races was written, it wasn't just, in German and people in Germany reading that. There were Americans reading that book. There were people all over the planet reading that book and probably having thoughts altered and changed, and some of the viral thinking seeping in all across the planet. Concepts of fighting for, again, the working people, that's an old concept, and it has really nothing to do with fascism. It really is like a puzzle getting put together with very specific pieces, right, that form this thing that becomes Nazism.
Yeah. Again, Nazism is combining a lot of pre-existing prejudices, right? And one of the, there are a couple of factors that we need to outline here for that context. Yes, the racism is not just based in Germany, obviously. It's not just based in the US, obviously. It hacks a universal psychological desire, which is, I think I'm great. B, why am I not as great as I feel like, right? C, what can tell me that I am somehow inherently better than other people? And this is something that you see leveraged all the time by bad faith actors. The country, the US, had and has a large German American population. And at this time, a lot of people are, first or second generation German Americans, and they still have family abroad. So they are not necessarily agreeing with the current political powers of Germany, but they're also saying, hey, don't dunk on these folks too hard because I'm from there, or I know those folks. I'm related to them. And the U.S. government, in theory, very much in theory, protects free speech. Groups like the German American Bund, BUND, Rise, they openly support specific Nazi ideology, along with, the symbols and the flags and the marching. And to be clear, a lot of these groups, especially the more militant ones, were similar to what we might call the QAnon movement of today, right? Minus the online presence. QAnon's largely started as an online thing, similar to a Tea Party or whatever kind of extremist ideology you want to put in. The overall German American community, at least, again, to be sure, according to the historians I read, they didn't really vibe with this group. They were like, hey, we moved. We just want a good economy. We want our kids to have a better opportunity at life. And the Nazi American groups, for the most part, they had little actual connection to the Nazi party in Germany, what our pal Lauren Vogelbaum would call the actual facts German Nazis. But still, even with that, they were fanboys. They wanted to bend American politics closer to Nazi ideals, particularly fascism and anti-Semitism. And a lot of Americans, German American or not, were kind of squigged out by this because they thought, what if there might be a German fifth column? And this was a fear that just translated from earlier fears about communism, right? A secret cabal of communists that were out to take over the hearts and minds of America, even though, to be 100% transparent, none of the Nazi American groups were down with communism. It was a big part of their speeches. Like, the best way to be anti-communist, That's how they started, because, they try to normalize things. They're like, hey, you hate communists, right, America? And they say, yeah, we hate communists. And they say, well, we hate them too. And the best way to fight communism is Nazi stuff.
Yeah, fascism, strong people that come through and just tell you what is and what's good and what's bad.
Exactly. And, this is not to dunk on anybody's personal perspective or experience. It's an understandable thing if we exercise empathy. Plus, the U.S. is a country where people are then as now, in theory, legally allowed to shoot their mouths off about all sorts of wackadoo ideas, right? I personally like seeing some crazy guy with a megaphone on a street corner. And the concept is, so long as you're not calling for violence nor harming people, you're theoretically good to go. As long as they're just homegrown dissidents and propagandists. But the question is, what if there were actual wolves operating amid the sympathizer sheep? In 1938, Hoover and the FBI, their fears were confirmed. This is where we discover the first conspiracy, which is, again, adapted into a movie that you can easily view on either archive.org or Amazon today.
Or Turner Classic Movies.
Or TCM.
Yeah. And the information contained in that movie is based on a screenplay, which is based on some articles that Turrou...
It's based on a book based on the articles.
Yes, based on a... Well, yes. Well, I don't know. According to TCM, the screenplay itself is based on the articles themselves rather than even the book. So it was articles that were told by Turrou to this guy named David G. Whittles, who was working for the New York Post in 1938 and 1939. So it's that, this is a story that Leon told, or Mr. Turrou told, to somebody else, and then it got turned into the story, right? I think that's just important to remember, because I don't know, a lot of it is probably correct, but it is one person's viewpoint, and this person tends to, at least according to a lot of people that knew him, didn't always say the truth. So it's like, okay. So here is, as you said, how this whole thing begins. It's February 1938. The police in New York City arrest this guy. His name's Günther Gustav Maria Rumrich. On behalf of the Army and the State Department, they arrest this guy because the Army and the State Department are like, this guy's bad. The State Department received a tip from British intelligence claiming that this person was impersonating the Secretary of State in order to obtain 35 blank U.S. passports. Why?
What an interesting question. Let's bring him in and ask. He's impersonating the Secretary of the State at the time is a guy named Cordell Hull. And Cordell Hull, obviously no longer the Secretary of State. However, it sounds crazy ambitious right now for anybody who's tried to get a passport with their own real identity in the modern day. Rumrich knew enough about the processes and mechanisms of the U.S. government to do some social engineering, or attempt it. However, as we'll see, Rumrich had an ego disease. He was maybe a little bit... Well, let's say it this way. He's a crafty character. He's ambitious. He's more than a little taken with himself. He's a naturalized citizen. He was a U.S. Army sergeant till he deserted. And he's a textbook example, I would just argue, of a guy who fancied himself destined for greater things. As any investigator can tell you, small people with big egos are a gift when it comes to busting a crime ring. And so you can see this in the articles and the book and the film, which we'll talk about all three of those toward the end, where we get to the Leon question here. But in all of those depictions or descriptions or narratives, one common thread we see is that Rumrich, or the characters based on Rumrich, are easily manipulated by flattery. So the interrogators are saying, oh, wow, you're a mastermind. I mean, look, I interview a lot of criminals. but you're different, so surely you'll have a better lie than that, or something like this. And so Rumrich ultimately agrees to confess. This part is true. This is not the smoke and mirrors nor the adaptations. He says, well, I'm not actually just a regular Joe, a regular naturalized citizen and deserter. I am acting on behalf of Nazi agents, the Abwehr, Germany's foreign intelligence service at the time. And he says further, you fools, German agents have worked since the late 1920s to infiltrate industry, government, and academia in the United States. And then he said, look, I'll tell you my story, because he liked talking about himself. He said, I'll give you the names of 10 to 15 spies that are currently working for Nazi Germany as part of this infiltration operation. And I'll tell you some of the stuff we already found, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah. And there's a clip in the movie that I guess we could play. Yeah, why not? This is a movie from the 30s. Let's play this clip.
I am one of thousands stationed in every part of the United States to steal the secrets of your national defense. There are spies stationed in all of the Navy yards in Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Newport News. There are Nazi agents in the aeroplane and munition factories at Bristol, Buffalo, Seattle, Boston.
They're everywhere. The spies are everywhere. Did he say Newport News?
Newport News, Virginia, right?
That's a place?
Yeah, Newport News, Virginia.
Oh, okay. I did not know. I thought I was looking at a publication or a paper when I heard Newport News.
Yeah. So that's the adaptation. Going back to Rumrich, in his interrogations, he does say they were able to already have stolen top secret U.S. technology. Codes, a prototype of a code breaking machine, not Enigma, importantly. That's a different one. Okay. That's different realm of cryptography. And they also got data about communication structures and the latest U.S. fighter planes. So they leave the interrogation room with his folks and go to a very intense series of meetings and communiques. This is a classic bad news, but not the worst news situation. The State Department, the FBI, and the War Department are in what corporate America would call a healthy discussion about the next steps, which for all us non-corporate folks out there means that they were yelling over each other and they were super pissed. And one of the most pissed people is the legendarily non-paranoid J. Edgar Hoover. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Hoover immediately looked at it and just said, guys, I don't have enough control over this. This thing is compromised for sure. There's way too many hands in this pot. I don't even want to touch it.
I wonder if it was even about control for him as much as
everything was about control for him,
as much as it might have been about just quality standards. I mean, you're probably right on both, but he, as you said, he noted that the case was already compromised, right? This guy by this time is already off his top hat. He didn't wear top hats, but he's off his top hat about communist infiltration. He's thinking, if you don't work directly for me, I can't trust you. And to him, the State Department, the War Department may already be riddled with foreign agents. But the War Department insists that this is the FBI's job, and the War Department at this time has a lot of juice because the world is increasingly they've gone from worrying about a new world war to increasingly assuming that it's going to happen. The poop is on the way to the fan. The car's about to swerve and hit the tree. So despite all the objections, and ardent objections they were, the task of tackling the spy ring falls to the FBI. This is the beginning of our second conspiracy. It's a counter conspiracy. And from the jump, everybody in the FBI says, well, if you work for us, you understand. You're aware of our boss, Hoover. You know that we have to keep this stuff super secret. No chasing publicity. And this is where we enter Turrou. At this point, he's an experienced special agent And he's the kind of guy who, on paper, is a perfect fit for this operation.
Yeah. So they said, hey, this is your assignment, dude. Get out there. Get it done. So they take all the information they got from Rumrich, right? Then they go and interview other people who were apparently a part of this whole group. Who's this next person? Dr. Igans Griebel?
Yeah, he had already been identified as the head of the U.S. German intelligence ring. He's probably the smartest. He's one of the most fortunate of the German spies. He functions in a big way as a recruiter. So it's like a multi-level marketing scheme. He's recruiting people, they're recruiting other people. And he is successfully arrested, the good doctor. Weirdly enough, he makes bail, and surprise, as soon as he makes bail, he skips town. He's off to Europe. He's not coming back, and it seems that Turrou is realizing, despite Rumrich's claims, he himself is more a minor operator. He's a minor cog. You know what I mean? He's not James Bond, this guy, but he is a lot like a jukebox in that once you put a quarter in him, the guy will sing. And he starts breaking down the operation as far as he knows it. He talks about folks like Johanna Hoffman, who serves as a go-between for Rumrich's contacts in Germany, a guy named Karl Schluter. And he says this Karl guy, Schluter, is also contacting other spies in America. Our pal, Johanna Hoffman, gets a lot of mail. And that's something that Hoover and the boys can look into.
Yeah, reading people's mail, listening to people's calls, doing all that. What was the title? There's a Time magazine article on this, and it is titled Snoop, Look, and Listen. They were all about that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Library records, postal records. And according to Rumrich, before he was captured, he was using the code name Crown. We can't even get into agent sex, which is another alleged thing. It's so nuts. So Rumrich, under his operator name Crown, would email letters to a Scottish woman named Jessie Jordan, who was also a spy for German foreign intelligence. And he, in his correspondence, mentions a plan for German Secret Service agents to overpower, actually to mug, an American Army colonel in Manhattan at the Hotel McAlpin. And they were going to mug him to steal East Coast defense plans for the U.S. In the situation of war. Because again, a war has not started yet, and the agents will take the plans.
Yeah, that's the concept, right? But having the defense plans for an entire seaboard of a country, if maybe your Navy was going to roll up, would be a nice thing to have. It makes a lot of sense strategically.
Right. And then afterwards, you want to eliminate the hand, right? So the idea was after they knock this guy out and steal his stuff, they'll try to do a stitch-up job to blame vague communist forces or no communist affiliates, which, it's happened before and it does work when you pull it off. But these investigations that Turrou is doing, they work as sort of a daisy chain, a game of connections. If this, then what? So you find one snake in the grass, you wiggle it a little, you manipulate it to revealing others. And to be fair, Turrou and his team were closing in on spies, but why did the FBI itself later refer to him as a bungler? You can go to the actual FBI archive, and I know not all the writing is super compelling, but they have a lot of good articles to be like. They do have some really good stuff. And one article is called A Bite Out of History, Spies Caught, Spies Lost, Lessons Learned. And the FBI writes, the FBI has some serious beef with Leon because they say that he kind of screwed the pooch on the whole thing.
Well, yeah, he would interview people who were telling him and everybody who's interviewing them, "Hi, I'm a spy. How are you?" Nice to meet you. I'm a spy. And then, and here are all my activities I was doing as a spy. And then Turrou comes through at the end of every interview and says, okay, hey, thank you so much for all that information. You've been extremely helpful. Now, you're going to have to say all of this again, and you're going to testify before a grand jury. Cool? And guess what? Most of those spies did.
They left.
Yeah.
Post haste. As soon as they were out of the room, they were booking a taxi to a port, and they were gone. And then they were alerting other people in their network. The FBI specifically says this quote, it is a verbatim quote, after each interview, Turrou told the spies that they'd need to testify before a grand jury, and most fled the country to avoid prosecution.
Makes sense.
Soon as. Soon as. And they shouldn't have even let that doctor out on bail. That was crazy. He also, fun fact, it was one of the first FBI investigations to employ polygraphs, which are, junk science. But that's important because most of the later cases in these conflicting conspiracies ultimately depended upon the statements of spies themselves without a ton of corroborating evidence, because again, the war hadn't happened yet. So it's tough to, like if you have the plans for defense on the East Coast, and this is all over the press at the time, if you have the plans for defense on the East Coast and a successful operation leverages those plans, then it's a lot easier to convict people because something actionable occurred.
Yeah, but now you're being invaded by another country, right? So you're in a whole other situation, and are you even going to be able to convict somebody if you can't stop an invasion?
Yeah. So this is, again, bad news, but not the worst news situation until, it does get worse.
And it will right after this break.
And we've returned. This became the FBI's first major international spy case, right? Like there had been spies busted before the creation of the FBI. There had been other operations, but nothing of this magnitude. 18 people are indicted. The trial is going to be held in Manhattan Federal Court. The judge is John C. Knox. It's October 14th, 1938, when they start selecting the jury. And I'm sure there was a lot of prejudice there, right? How many German Americans got to be those 12 lucky people?
No wonder.
I'm going to say not many. And October 14th is when Rumrich pleads guilty. Fast forward just a little bit. December 2nd, 1938, less than a year before the beginning of World War II, these cases go to trial. At least the cases for the people who were apprehended and didn't immediately flee town as soon as they were given the chance.
Yeah, there are 3 individuals, Johanna Hoffman, Otto Hermann Voss, and Eric Glasser, Glaser. They were all found guilty of espionage through this trial.
Yeah, and Gunther Rumrich is found guilty as well, but he gets a reduced sentence because he turned stoolie. So the spies all serve between 2 to 6 years each. Again, our buddy Dr. Greibel has successfully fled the country. In 1938, this is a funny story. In 1938, depending on who you ask, Turrou is fired for breaking the FBI oath, right? Or the implicit assumption of secrecy, because he's leaked stories to the press. He's publicized a lot of stuff. He's the one who pitched writing articles for the papers. And the one version I heard, to that earlier point about multiple versions, one version I heard was that our buddy Leon resigned to write his book. So he sent his own resignation proactively to the FBI.
But he didn't say, hey, I'm going to go write a book to like anybody official, right?
He just put in his resignation, but word got around. And that's another version of this. If these bifurcate and form back, then the conclusion of the funny version of it is that J. Edgar Hoover finds out this guy's resigning, and then finds out why. And Edgar Hoover is furious, is consumed with wrath. And he says, I reject your resignation, jerk. You're fired. No resigning for you. You don't get it. It's like the opposite version of you can't fire me, I quit.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was that there was serious damage here, and the damage reverberated. However, Turrou still had to go to trial, right, of these suspects. And when he was on trial, he got accused of being a huge publicity hound. And they're like, oh, you weren't really protecting America. You wanted to become famous. You wanted money, power, respect. You tampered with witnesses. They even said that he took a bribe from Dr. Greibel, which we couldn't prove, but he was accused of it. And that goes to the court of public opinion. It is true, though. He did end up writing those newspaper articles. He wrote Nazi Spies in America. According to some sources, those articles directly got adapted to a film. According to other sources, that book got adapted to a film, which is
either way, it's money, right?
Right. He did get paid for it, which goes to ethical concerns. And Matt, off air, you were saying the title of the film, as it's known today, is Confessions of a Nazi Spy. Again, freely available. It's a very interesting look at society of the time. It is propagandistic itself because it's Hollywood's first explicitly anti-Nazi kind of film of this caliber. But you also said you have the original working title.
Oh, there are several working titles, but one of them that you can find on TCM, if you check it out, is Storm Over America. Storm was coming back in 1938, Ben. It's funny. In the trailer, they say, it was our duty to make this film, and it's your American privilege to see it. And then it was chosen as Best Picture of the Year by the National Board of Review in 1939.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I knew that part. It was successful. There's no way around it. It was very successful. But I think we could argue the film is more successful than the actual operation on the Rumrich spy ring, because due to, in big part, Turrou's investigation methods, 4 times as many spies escaped as were captured. So it's kind of like trying to pick up rice with a fork.
Yeah, that has not been cooked.
Right, uncooked rice with a fork. Yes. And I mean, the other thing is, I was wondering if we mentioned this. This is not the end of Leon's professional nor personal life. He was involved in a lot of other situations. You would think this would be such a black marker or demerit on somebody's career that you're just out, right? You retire in exile or obscurity. You start a emu farm or something. But he got hired by Eisenhower.
Nice.
It's a career move. Yeah. He rounded up 35,000, or he helped in an operation round up 35,000 suspected Nazi war criminals. He got a Bronze Star. He wrote another book, and I haven't read this one. It's called Where My Shadow Falls in 1949.
I told you he's in the shadows.
Mm-hmm. Where does his shadow fall? Oh, he works for a billionaire. He works for Jean-Paul Getty, and then he just hangs around Paris for most of the rest of his life, and he becomes like a popular dude on the street. They call him the American Mayor. Not an official title.
Yes, a man of mystery right there.
An American Mayor. And we do know that he passes away on December 10th, 1986. And that number is fascinating because these stories, I don't know about you, man, these stories often feel so constrained to a distinct time in history. 1986. That's pretty nuts. A lot of people listening were around when that guy was alive.
That's weird to think about. But it does make me, I don't know, when I think about his life overall, I think about the allegations of him making up a lot of stuff about himself. It does make me wonder, I don't know, back in the day, like the vetting process for an individual human, and trying to check records, you really did have to go off of word of mouth often. Like an employer, if you're checking references or something, or I don't know, parents, family, friends, teachers, professors, like you just had to listen to what other people had to say about somebody and trust that that was true.
It was another daisy chain investigation. It kept shaking the trees. I mean, and I love that point, because then it also shows us why a lot of people had collegiate backgrounds, right? Why a lot of State Department intelligence agencies pull from what we would consider upper echelon or Ivy League schools, right? There is a preformed community. Exactly.
And everybody can say, oh, yeah, I know that person. I remember they've told me this or that. Yeah, that's what they told me.
His secret frat name is Finicky Jenkins.
Oh, dear.
Like, oh, okay, he checks out. I mean, but that's also a weakness in those organizations. You know, that's why the Cambridge spy ring was able to exist at all. I think it's because of that inherent class system, as well as, to your point, the very difficult task of vetting people. It's a little bit easier now, or depending on what side of the fence you're on, it's a lot more difficult to be a bit of a con artist. The FBI, going back to the original article, they say that this guy's background just did not prepare him to do espionage, and that when he leaked information about the case, he violated everything an FBI agent is supposed to do. And we've talked about this before, you know, whenever you read an article, especially in high-level U.S. media, about an official speaking on condition of anonymity, that was greenlit like 4 ways to sundown, you know, before somebody said, yeah, I'll speak anonymously.
Yeah.
There's like tons of conversations they have to have with their bosses. Somebody probably checks with another agency and says, hey, are you cool with us talking trash about Tehran? And they're like, yeah, but don't use your real name. And they're like, okay, I'm going to go as my frat name, Finicky Jenkins. And they're like, well, just, okay, in that case, don't use a name at all.
That's pretty funny. It is interesting how there's so much to be made about Rumrich getting coins put into him and then singing, right? But that is pretty much what Turrou did, because he was so excited to tell people about what he had done. Like, all right, you can see some commonalities here.
Agreed. Sometimes people become the monsters they hunt, right? Or acquire their attributes. And I think that's a fantastic point, because we also see, it was an earlier conversation we were having about the professor or the academic who was in charge of Hannibal Lecter and Silence of the Lambs, both the novels and the film adaptations. His main concern was publicity, right? And success. And you could argue, I think you could argue with a lot of validity, that Turrou's at least partially doing this stuff. I mean, when he leaks information, is he trying to shake the tree, roust some more operatives? Or, as the FBI very, very heavily implies, was he just trying to get attention and money and center himself as a hero? I don't know if those things are mutually exclusive, to be honest, because sometimes people believe their own BS.
Yeah, I think that's quite often the case. But I wonder how you would. Let's game it out. You do come out with this information, you leak it to the New York Post, and like, how does that shake the tree? How would that not cause anybody who is, you know, engaging in spying behaviors? Why would they come forward?
It would only work if you already have strong suspicion or understanding of them. So if you already know their established patterns and correspondence, and you leak something like that, the next thing you do is watch them and see if and how they alter that behavior or pattern. Because
if you suspect somebody of being a spy, you give, in this case, real information and just see how they react. Right.
Like I hypothetically, or just thought experiment way to do it. Let's say you and Paul and I had pretty solid intel, we had arrested our Rumrich or whatever, and we had a pretty good understanding of 5 other spies in the Atlanta metro area, right? And we knew their names. We knew enough about them to monitor them. And then we let slide in, the Atlanta Journal or Constitution under condition of anonymity or whatever, that we suspect there are more spies in the Atlanta area. And then we would just keep those 5 people on 24/7 surveillance to see who runs for the airport first. And we would meet them there.
That's really interesting. I think that theoretically it would work for those 5 particular people. The larger effect, and maybe that's what the FBI was criticizing, the larger effect is that the rest of the network, because you're going after a small nest, basically, the rest of the network just says, okay, we're out. Cover blown.
Ties, bye. Ghost. Yeah. And you got to cauterize the wound, right? So burn those other 5. Yeah. It's kind of like, this is why I'm putting it in there to be fair, but this is why I remain suspicious of the purity of Turrou's motives, because it reminds me of the idea of leaking information for greater advantage or forward progress on an operation like this. It reminds me a lot of very specific moves in fighting games, like Yoshimitsu, for anybody familiar with Tekken, has a move where he can stab himself and it does a lot of damage to him. But if his opponent is in a position that doesn't often happen, where they're standing directly behind them, then it's a big win. But that position usually doesn't happen, is the issue. That's why it's a special move.
Why did he get a sword? That always baffled me. Yoshimitsu got a sword, right?
Oh, and everybody else is pretty much hand to hand?
Yeah. Come on. What's up with that?
In the new Tekken, they have, a guy who is, I guess his background is a spy as well. He, for some reason, has a knife and a gun.
Oh,
and
wow.
a suit. Yeah, it doesn't seem fair.
And they got a bear in the mix? Come on.
Yeah, they got a bear in the mix. Do you think you could fight a panda bear? Like, not a bear, but a panda bear?
Probably not.
I don't feel like I would ever. They seem so non-aggro. I feel like if I was holding bamboo, a panda bear might get angry at me. Or like snatch for the bamboo.
Yeah, just want to, come on, man, give me some bamboo.
Yeah, it's more like that Dave Chappelle character than it is like an aggro thing. But yeah, you're right. I never thought about that. Yoshimitsu has a sword. Huh. Story for another day. What is the most overpowered fighting game character, in your opinion? Because I think we both played a lot of fighting games.
Oh, I don't know. Overpowered? Probably Zangief. I'm just playing.
That's funny. Yeah. I don't know. You tell us, folks. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com. We do have to say, I guess there is a silver lining. There's this historian I've been reading, Rhodri Jeffries Jones, who wrote a book called The FBI, A History, and several other articles. And Jeffries Jones argues that because of the flaws in this spy ring case, due pretty much entirely to Turrou, the U.S. embarked on a better counter-espionage program. Like, it went up to Franklin D. Roosevelt, president at the time, and he said, his fancy version of, holy smokes, this is terrible. We have to make sure this doesn't happen again. And so in a way, this informs a lot of the COINTELPRO stuff we see later, a lot of the sweeping surveillance laws that come into play. The FBI. Stellar Wind. There we go. 5 eyes to watch them all, I don't know, man. It seems like perhaps, at least in part because of these conflicting conspiracies, the U.S. government has gone down a potentially dark path, breaking or bending the laws of their own country multiple times, up to and including murder in service of a greater good. I mean, is there a balance to be struck? And if so, what is it?
That's a great question. Why don't you let us know? what you think about it. You can reach us all over the place on YouTube and on X, on, what was the other one? Facebook, we are Conspiracy Stuff. On Instagram and TikTok, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
And if you're not sipping the social meds, never fear, you can always contact us on a telephonic device. The number, say it along at home, 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call the number, you'll hear a message and a beep like so. Beep. That gives you 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes are yours. Go nuts. We love new leads for shows. We love reactions. We also like just some nice things, like the anonymous person who wrote into us and said that we talk well and do things right, with eloquent emails as well. Most importantly, give yourself a cool name, nickname, moniker. Let us know if we can use your name and or message on air. And if that doesn't quite bag your badgers, if you have more than 3 minutes worth of stuff to say, send us the links, send us the pictures, take us to the edge of the rabbit hole. We will do the rest. Drop us a line at our good old-fashioned email address, where we are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com. Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.